Emily Schrader, thank you so much for participating in this interview. You have participated and even given speeches at protests against Islamic Republic around the world, from the US, Europe, and here in Australia. What motivates you to attend and participate in these protest rallies?
Well, I think as a journalist, I've been covering the issues in Iran and the human rights violations for many years, actually. So this isn't quite a new topic for me. What's different now about what's happening is that you obviously see a much more significant uprising. And I think one of the things that's really motivated me to be more outspoken about this issue and to support the calls of the Iranian people is that this is something that's being led first and foremost by the people of Iran, whether it's Iranians in the diaspora, whether it's refugees in the diaspora, or Iranians on the ground. So this is really coming from them. And all I can do as an individual who's outside that community and as someone who's supposed to be from an enemy country is to echo their voice and to be their voice as much as possible in whatever languages I can, because we know that the Islamic Republic is working hard to censor those voices and to shut down their voice, whether it be in the internet or with the violence that they're engaging in against the protesters on the streets. So for that reason, I thought and still think that it's incredibly important to have unity from both inside and outside the community when it comes to the situation on the ground in Iran.
The Islamic Republic's regime and its leaders have always maintained that the current protests are led by Western countries, especially the US and Israel. As an Israeli-American journalist, how do you respond to this claim by the regime?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen for a very long time that a core principle of this regime is not only anti-Semitism, such as with their Holocaust cartoon competition, but also the demonization of Israel and the United States. There's a reason that one of their primary slogans of this regime has been death to America and death to Israel, the big Satan and the little Satan, as they call it. So it's no surprise at all that when they have their own population, both in Iran and outside of Iran, who are rising up against this regime and saying enough with mandatory hijab, enough with these draconian laws that are oppressing the people for over 44 years, that they were looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for someone else to blame. That's not new. It's been a tactic from day one of this regime, and it's just another example of how they're deferring responsibility for their failures from day one, for the way that they failed their own people and refused to take responsibility. So it's not surprising, but obviously it's not true. That being said, I think it's incredibly important that Israel as a country and as a people stand up and support the people of Iran when it comes to these protests. And the same goes for the United States and the European Union. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we've seen enough of that at the government level. I think there's been a huge outpouring of support from the people of the United States, of course, the people of Israel. You ask any Israeli on the street and they're going to have something positive to say about the Persian community, especially your food, best food in the world. But unfortunately, we haven't seen that same level of solidarity from the government. You know, we've seen a lot of leaders in the EU and the US who continue to speak about the Iran deal, the JCPOA. I think it's just absolutely absurd that this would even be on the table. This regime has no legitimacy, and we see that inside of Iran and outside of Iran. You know, over 80% of people, when polled, over 100,000 Iranians said that they want regime change, not reform, regime change. And I think it's incumbent upon us as people who are from democratic countries, who are from the Western world, to be their voice and to listen when the people of Iran are saying, we don't support this regime, we have no rights, we want regime change, support us in this call. And we're not seeing that enough. We need to see President Biden, we need to see the leaders of all European countries coming out and saying, yes, we support regime change.
The lobbyists of the Islamic Republic's regime want to show Western countries that the regime can be reformed. As someone who is familiar with these lobbying efforts, what's your opinion about their activities?
I think it's very dangerous that you have a lot of these groups who have access to world leaders in many different democratic countries that are really skewing the narrative in a way that doesn't reflect what the will of the people is on the ground. From everything that I see, from everything that I know, from all the Iranians that I have really ever spoken to, there isn't any support in the Iranian community, inside or outside of Iran, for groups like NAIAC in the United States, for example. And this narrative that the regime can be reformed is kind of a fantastical notion that I think a lot of Western leaders want to hold on to, because for them it may be easier than actually recognizing just how evil, the extent of how evil this regime actually is. Sometimes it's difficult to acknowledge those things because it's inconvenient at a government level. It means regime change ultimately, and that involves a lot of risks and a lot of changes. However, at the same time, I think that the benefits to supporting actual regime change are much greater, really, for the entire world. Obviously the Middle East, because you have a situation in which Iran is actually the Iranian regime is actually the biggest murderer of Arab Muslims than anywhere else in the world. As much as the Islamic regime would like you to believe that it's Israel, in fact, it's actually them who are killing Muslims on the streets in the Middle East. They've destabilized Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and the list goes on, and they're continuing to do so throughout the world. They are also destabilizing and involved with terrorist activities in Latin America, of course, Venezuela, as we know. They're using Latin America in order to avoid sanctions in some cases. Of course, they've been threatening and engaging in espionage activities here in Australia, in the United States, even on dual citizens in these countries. In the United Kingdom, they were threatening Iranian activists on the ground there who were citizens of the UK. There is no other country in the world that is operating this way. They're operating like an international terrorist mafia, and that's exactly what they are. And I think that it's high time that all of the Western countries in particular, everyone in the world, but of course the democratic countries who set the tone when it comes to the issues of human rights, or should be setting the tone, need to take a much firmer stance when it comes to these issues. It's not just about the nuclear deal. It's about much more than that. It's about human rights, and it's also about democratic values and democratic principles. And I think that the world leaders need to kind of put their money where their mouth is when it comes to these issues, and take a much, much firmer stand when it comes to the Islamic Republic, and stop giving people who are advocating for reform rather than regime change, stop giving them a platform, whether it be in the media or in, private offices with elected officials. These are not the people that are representing A, the values of any Western country, or B, the will of the Iranian people. And it's a slap in the face to the Iranians who are bravely standing on the streets, risking their own lives, people who are being shot, women who are being sexually assaulted because they're being arrested for protesting. It's a slap in the face of these people when you have meetings, when world leaders have meetings with these people who are advocating for reform rather than regime change. It's been 44 years, and there's no reason to expect that the Islamic Republic is going to change anything about their genocidal ideology that's exporting terrorism and bloodshed everywhere they're involved.
Emily Schrader, thank you so much for your time at the end of this interview. If you want to add any comments, it's your time.
The only comment I have to say is that as a message from Israel to the Iranian people, I think that there is no deeper desire from the people, and actually the government as well, of the state of Israel than having peace with the Iranian people. We've been friends longer than we've been enemies. The entire idea that Iran is an enemy state of Israel is something that is a core value of the Islamic Republic, not of the people of Iran. We were friends before Iran was one of the first countries to recognize the state of Israel. And I think that the day the Islamic Republic falls, we would be ready to have peaceful relations and normalization with the Iranian people. And I hope that that day comes very, very soon.